Hello, everybody. Just as a quick note, I did upload this devlog yesterday, but after looking at it myself, I just really didn't like how it came out. So I'm redoing it. Um, I don't plan on making a habit of doing this, but how it just felt really jumbled and out of place and all over, and I was very distracted when trying to make that. So I think it's only the best course of action to redo it with a little bit more focus and hopefully a little more clarity. Thank you. And let's begin. Welcome to the third devlog in a series of devlogs about a game that still doesn't have a name. And I am going to be covering world creation in this devlog. While the overall look and feel has been going through a process of being updated from new palettes to new sprite work to well, just about everything. What the world generation, well, I guess that tells you right there. The world is now generated as opposed to being statically created. And what I want to do with this video is kind of talk about first how I had things set up and present the problems that existed with that, and then kind of share how I moved from that design to uh, something that looks like this, where each room is generated through code. And I think maybe that'll give a little bit more insight and be a little bit better than how I tried to describe this earlier. What you're looking at right now is the starting forest at the very beginning of the game. You can see way over here, the main character starts right there. And they have to navigate through this forest to reach the first town. This took an exceedingly long time to put together, and this is it looks nice, honestly. It doesn't look bad at all, especially when you zoom out. It really looks like a lot of work was put into it, which unfortunately, a lot of time was put into this too. So much so that it became really clear early on the amount of hours it would take to actually complete this game, which is something to always be aware of, especially if you're doing that entire game from scratch as one person, like I am. So let's talk about the first problem I had, which is directly with the first mechanic. If you look around this character's, I don't know if you can see the purple line right here, but that represents the bounding box of the screen, and that remains still until the character reaches the end of it, and then it shifts over to the next one. And this is actually the first problem, and we're going to call this Zelda screens. Eans. I can type. You might be wondering what the problem is there. And simply put, as you shift your screen around, you can see that the overall structure of the map kind of is very conducive to each area fitting into a screen as you make your way through the zigzag shape. Um, an issue I had a lot was kind of along the lines of having any sort of object, and let's just put these anvils here. Here's where the screen shifts. So if anything ends up right here, you're not going to be able to see that, and you're going to stop on an invisible wall, and it feels disjointed, especially if things look a little bit more fluid, and you have a situation like this to where you can't quite tell why you can only walk through here and you can walk through, or you can't walk through over here. This comes up a lot when drawing out the levels. It was a lot of starting up playing the game to like move around to different areas to make sure you could actually get through and that things would fit. And that was a huge problem. And especially with larger and larger maps, it became difficult. I tried to create like little patterned blocks to put out, at first, so that way I would have the location of where stuff was. And looking at this forest over here, the second one, I started doing that and then tried to fill in. But again, even doing that, I kind of lost track of exactly, I think the line is somewhere in between these. Maybe it's closer to the left. I'm not sure. It was going to become a problem because it did a lot. And that's kind of the first issue I wanted to tackle was the screen shifting. Along with that, I ended up creating these very large areas. And this one, let's look over at Watercrest. This is a town. If you look over on the left right now, you can see that in this Y sort area, you can see all the objects they dropped in there. And this many objects are loaded immediately when the room loads, and this isn't even that much. I only have 17 plants, and that's something very important to know because I really like these plants. These are the ones you could just like smash and they explode into leaves or whatever, and super cool. Those are fun to have everywhere. I felt like I had to limit the how many that I had because there's dead bodies in this house. Anyway, because I just didn't want to load 5 million objects every time you walked into a place, and a lot of these objects are somewhat accounted for even when they're off screen, and so you start entering these areas that are this big where you're just, you come in through this down here and enemies are loaded throughout this entire area. And one of the things I actually did to attempt to resolve this was, let's look at this beach for instance. I have static enemies that are there drawn on the map, and then I also have these areas where when you enter them, monsters will just spawn randomly throughout this area. This in itself became a kind of a issue for me because if I have enemies that are static and enemies that randomly appear, it feels disjointed. It feels like two competing mechanics, and this is created just to help alleviate the amount of monsters around that were, around and on the screen and just generated in the area. And it felt like it. It felt like it didn't belong, especially when you have them closer to where normal enemies are. Don't. It was an idea. It doesn't come out right. But again, I did like the idea of generating enemies. That's fun because then you could do things like pull enemies randomly from tables. One thing you do when you work on a game yourself is you playtest it a lot until your eyeballs fall out. And having randomly generated enemies at least gives you something fun and refreshing each time you go through. Just crossing this weird crab every time that happens to be right on a screen shift line, by the way. So half the time he's just slightly out of view. Yeah, you get bored. It's not fun over and over and over. And so I'm going to call this issue number of objects. Now, to be fair, this never actually became an issue. I never experienced lag or slowdown with the number of objects, but I was also too afraid to put as many plants and as many NPCs or as many monsters out as I really wanted to. And because I didn't have an actual technical issue, but I had an issue that prevented me from, trying things and doing what I wanted, I consider that to be a really huge deal. Issue number three. Transitioning from one area to the next. The reason these areas are so big is because creating a transition from one area to the next is horrible and not necessarily anything I enjoy doing. I'm just going to straight up put this in here now. Transitions are terrible and I hate them. And you should too. Let's stretch this out. By the way, this is Microsoft OneNote. I started using it at work, and for some reason, I just really like using it for everything. I don't know. That's the weird Microsoft product call out that nobody expects. Okay, so let's talk about these transitions. I want to go from here to from Watercrest Forest to Watercrest, the town. And so right over here, past the bounding box of where your screen transitions go, I have this pathway. And I have to put a wall after it so you don't just run off forever. And this pathway, the way I decided to do this, which more and more I think is probably not the best way of doing it. I don't think it's a very like programmy way of handling things. I think that there's probably a lot more clever ways to do it. But this is what I have been doing, and I don't like it. So I've created this area 2D. This detects when the player enters it, and there's a linked area that you add in this variable, which is the name of the file for the next area, and an X and Y position. So you walk into this, it looks for Watercrest, it'll load this up, and it moves the player to that X and Y, which I put somewhere around here. I then have to create another pathway that points back to Watercrest Forest, and then has the correct position to put the player back there. Not too bad, right? Kind of is. Because every time you make a mistake in the X and Y and it looks weird, you have to go in and adjust it, which is a lot of playtesting. Anytime you make a typo in the linked area, it either takes you to the wrong area or the game just crashes because it tries to load a file that's not there. Lots of problems could come from this, and lots of problems do. Also, if you have a lot of those, like there are only 3 exits here, that means there's at least 6 of those areas you have to create. And then if you have an area like this beach, which has another 3, as you can tell, I've kind of limited this down. There could potentially be a number of exits in and out of this area, and each one requires 2 of those pathways to be created, tested, and applied. And it's just not fun. It's horrible. I've struggled with getting those to work. I mean, they work fine. The struggle is actually getting the X and Y correct because usually I copy them and move them over, and I have some in the template for each area, and then I forget to change things on them, or I just don't want to, and then you kind of start to dread building out areas. And then your solution, if you're me, is to make the areas bigger and bigger, which creates the other issues I talked about before with the screen sliding, and the amount of objects and everything become secondary issues now because everything ties back to how much I don't like the areas. So that was another big thing that I wanted to tackle. I'm going to go back over here because this is a really minor gripe, but making areas takes too long. I'll never finish this. Uh, this is a huge problem. I've started a number of projects and I haven't finished a lot of them. And believe it or not, the item number 3 with the transitions is actually a huge blocker for me. It just doesn't. I don't know. I mean, it's not a great way of doing it. I tried other things before, and I don't know. The good thing about those areas is you can create them in a way to where, well, let's look. Okay, yeah, I didn't do it with these, but I had some before with a toggleable switch to where it says you need to interact with, and that way they wouldn't automatically take you somewhere unless you like hit the action button or whatever over it. So you could use that for like doorways or something, passageways, stairs, whatever that you need to actually interact with to transport you to a new area. So, I mean, that was cool, but overall, the amount of work involved in getting these to work, and they always felt janky for me. I don't know. I couldn't get it to go the way I wanted to. And so that's why that had to be resolved. And that's kind of actually the biggest thing. I think there's some other issues too. But I was really focused on that, the screen sliding. It took forever to make these two, by the way. I started just jamming a bunch of trees together for design. And what's really funny too is because, as I talked about earlier, the Zelda-like screen sliding, I ended up resolving that by really, really squaring off each area to fit in a screen. So now the areas don't actually look that smooth. They look like blocked out areas. It kind of looks a little bit like a Metroidvania, but looks a lot like the original Legend of Zelda in a sense, like where each screen is clearly defined. But this actually worked. These are the only areas, these 4 areas are the only ones that felt good. The rest didn't flow well with the screen moving by blocks, especially when the area didn't seem to have that physical structure to really back that camera. I think it's important for the camera to make sense with the world. I feel like no one will disagree with that, but it just wasn't working. A lot of this stuff wasn't working together. I had ideas, things, just nothing worked. And so I took a step back and I said, you know what? Let's go try something that I really like. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this solutions over here. Line that up perfectly. I'm a pro. I should never type on being recorded because my typing speed's really fast until I have an idea that someone's watching me and then just all over the place. Okay, so we need solutions, right, for the Zelda screens. Um, and what I came up with is, you know what, here's the idea. We know there's one solution to all this, and this is called random world generation. And the reason I went with this is because this is a solution to everything. Uh, the solution to Zelda screens is that this will no longer be needed. And let's talk about this really quick. This right here represents every screen on the map in the game. It's all right here. There's not even a lot of objects associated with it. There are actually 4 of these areas that I told you that I hate. I'm still using them, but I'm only using 4 and I never have to update them. They don't have a linked area. They don't have a new position to deal with. I took some liberties in cheating that to make sure that would work perfectly, and I don't care. This is what I like. I never have to deal with these horrible things again. And yes. So the screens, as you can tell with the purple square rectangle around the character, that's the screen. So each room is a little bit bigger than a screen. It gives you some walking around. The screen will follow the player. Let's just look really quick. Just want to show that because I think that no one will hate this. Each area is about this big. You have a little bit of room over here. You have room over here. You can walk down here and yeah, I think that's fine. That's a perfect size for a room. And I've got no complaints. I actually feel this feels really good to me. And I think a part of it too is I increased the character speed a bunch too, so that overall I think it doesn't feel like you're trapped in giant areas and they don't feel too small either. All right, so this will no longer be needed. And let's wait, hold on. Let's do indenting. Now it doesn't line up, but whatever. Uh, So besides this no longer being needed, I can now have larger screen sizes. This isn't how I normally take notes. I don't do full sentences, but I'm just typing what I'm saying. Um, because these areas are smaller, and I don't know if you saw how many plants there were generated there. There were quite a few, and that didn't count monsters or anything because they don't generate where you start. But for number 2, we have no worries, mate, mate, mate. There we go. I don't know why I had to do that. But yeah, so I can generate a whole lot of things, and because it's a small room now, I don't have to worry as much about how many things I put into it because it's not going to match how many things I wanted to put into those gigantic maps, which I know those weren't that big. And I've already talked about transitions. Transitions, I can spell. Transitions are less, sir. And number. These are the worst bullet points I've ever seen. Hold on a second. Hold on. Let me just rewrite these. Okay. Improved object to area ratio and no additional transition setup. That makes way more sense. And number 4, for making areas too long, as I said, these are randomly generated. So there is a lot of work in the back end of tweaking things here and there, but uh, rooms are made on the fly, sort of. So there we go. These are all the solutions, just some random world generation that met these problems that drove me crazy. Um, I just wanted to put these out in a way that they're typed out so that way it makes a little bit more sense. Every time I try to explain this normally, I'm kind of all over the place because there were a number of issues that I was dealing with, and I now have a way to resolve all of them. All right, so again, here's where we're at. And you can tell that I was interrupted midway there because I forgot if I was in the middle of a sentence or not. But we're starting with, all right, um, this is what the world looks like right now. Every cell, every room looks like this. And but when I say this is what the world looks like, that's not entirely true. Um, this is what each room looks like. The world itself is a two-dimensional array of numbers representing if a room exists or not. I think that for now, I'm only going to do a very brief top level overview of the world generation. I'm sort of taking some ideas that I've heard and using them in my own way, and I'd rather go over them more when I've made them a little bit more of my own rather than adapting what other people have already come up with. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. I mean, using references or what other people have come up with to help you get from zero to, you know, your goal is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, because sometimes it's just really hard to come up with something from scratch. And let's be honest, any game I make is probably not going to be doing anything so unique to where it's never been done before. And you just have to accept that sometimes that what you're doing may the part of your project, the part of your game that may be unique. It may not be the whole concept. It may not be all the gameplay mechanics. I mean, how many Souls-like games are there now? How many, Zelda likes? How many games took the Breath of the Wild climbing mechanic, right? Those are all individual games. I mean, people can joke about how mechanics and how things looked and felt were adapted from one game to the next, but in the end, what makes these games separate and unique is, I think, the character and idea of the designers behind the creation of the game. What I mean is, don't worry too much about what you're making and how similar it may be to what other people have done because in time your personality and your let's go super anime on this, your hopes, dreams, and desires are what is going to create the unique points in the game. And then if you look later and you find out that someone beat you to what you're doing and they've basically done every single thing you've done, then you still have time to make some changes to make your game a little bit more unique. Because I don't think anybody wants to create something that's a carbon copy of what somebody else made. Uh, but with that in mind, this is where I'm at right now. I do understand random generation. I'm really familiar with that. I used to make tons of hilarious random phrase generators and some random game generators that were all text based back in the day. And so I kind of have ideas there. I know what I'm doing. But the thing that I had the most trouble with was describing how to create the initial world map. I'm going to launch this really quick. And again, I'm only doing a top level thing because I definitely am using somebody else's method for creating this map. And I don't feel too bad about it because it still creates random maps and there's still some control that you could put into it to define the overall shape. And so I'm not going to go too into it right now because I may change this just to feel a little more unique, a little less like I'm using somebody else's idea. Um, and I don't think there's anything wrong with using their idea. It was something that was freely shared. I don't know. I'll talk about it later. I don't want to go too into like, you know, programmer's guilt, let's call it. But this creates a map, and the whole mini map is viewable right from the get-go because I want to know where things are. Like most games, this will be where you only see where you've been, and you'll have to navigate around to find stuff. Each cell represents a room. And this whole section here represents one of the core areas. And for that, I don't know what to call them, but this is the forest. This whole area is the forest. And each one of these cells is a forest cell. And each cell can have a different type of a sub area to it. These gray areas represent something. These little brown areas represent town cells. And if I walk out of this room and don't get mobbed by monsters right away, you can see where I was at with the weird little angel thing is a Oh, I'm dead. Wow. Okay. That was unpleasant. That is a sanctuary, and that's kind of like a save spot, and that's where obviously where you start, and the room's kind of empty right now, but as evident by that, what just happened in that room I walked into, I really wanted to create a room that I could load up and stand in and take some notes or whatever without immediately getting murdered by small worms. All right, let's go back over here for a second, because when you're coming up with generation for worlds, there's a couple things that you need to consider. And I'm going to take this out, and I'm going to move this over here. All right, so when you think of random world generation, I'm sure, and stop me if this is terrible. No, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's not do. Which shortcut is it? Oh, whatever. Um, let's use the secret power of pausing while I look. Anyway, now that that's been resolved, so random world generation, those are words that are hard to say. You have the world itself, and that has some data. And then beyond that, oops, wrong way. Beyond that, you have each room or cell, depending on how you want to describe it, and that has some data. And I think what's important to note is that this is the structure of everything in the game world. And so in the end, the world itself is basically, and really going to trivialize this, the map of rooms, cells. That's it. The world itself contains that and some, global information or whatever. And each room has a lot of information to it. Um, Sort of everything that you can imagine, like exits, room type, as I mentioned, I have that, and various other things. And I'll probably dive into the code to look and show you in a second. But this is kind of a way to think about how you're going to set these up. But some things are important. I'm going to talk about this a lot, and this is going to get really confusing because I tend to use words interchangeably because I don't actually talk to people normally, and my vocabulary is all over the place. It's not really true, but the world has a world seed, and that seed number is a randomly generated seed number, right? And then each room has a room seed, and the world seed is used to construct the world and manage some global items there, but each room has its own seed as well. And that enables each room to have some sort of variation amongst similar rooms that are within the world. Yeah, so those are the two terms I'm probably going to be using a lot is world seed or room seed, and I may say cell seed or whatever. So right here, this is the world. This is that world I'm talking about. It is in the Godot game editor, engine editor thingy. It is one node with a script attached to it. It's basically just the script, but I have it as a node because it's easy to set that scene as preload. I don't know. I just did it that way. It's 358 lines of code. That's it. Not that bad. Let's look at the top without going into the details. This is sort of the section of stuff that I have here, um, where if you, uh, this is where it builds the map. It does it based off an image, which this is the part I definitely took from somebody else. You can convert pixels to rooms and then do stuff with that. Um, and I wish I could come up with something better on my own. I looked around. This felt like something fun. I had no idea this was possible. So I was like, I'm going to do something similar. And that's kind of where I'll probably get more into it later once I've found a way to make it a little more me. Um, and then it does some stuff to go through and I kind of heavily leaned on ideas and tutorials and stuff from other people on building the world because this is just creating that grid of cells. And then I have items down here. But first, can you tell I'm a little bit embarrassed that I'm using stuff that other people created that they showed, hey, here's how I did this. If they wanted this to be a secret, they wouldn't have shown how people could do this. But I don't know. Like I said before, what matters is that you make the game your own. And obviously you're not stealing stuff that people have like explicitly copywritten or said, hey, don't do this or whatever. I should have a list in the game of all those that I'm crediting with the ideas that have gotten me this far, at least. And that's something I should probably do because, I don't feel like I want to do everything from scratch myself, right? Every single thing. And I think that's also a way of getting yourself into trouble. It kind of goes in that beginning programmer stage of like, oh, I don't want to use a game engine. I'm going to do it all from scratch. And then you really shoot yourself in the foot. But I will say this for myself. This what I saw was not done in Godot, and so I replicated all of it. Well, I didn't replicate it, but I built it all myself based off hints and cues from what I saw. Anyway, enough of my guilty conscience. Let's look at this. So here's this transition. By the way, this is just something that loads area to area, and I this is actually placed in a weird spot, but it still works. So it doesn't matter. Basically, all the rooms are created. The starting room right now is just a random pick of all the rooms in, the forest, as I call this area, and it just picks one of those to be the sanctuary and sticks that in some global variables to say, hey, this is where you start. Um, Global is where I just put a bunch of stuff that is going to be kept and maintained throughout the game outside of each individual scene. What's important about this is I also have the save functions down here, so it's easy to grab everything that I need here. But the player coordinates are what's currently being used and stored here. And this basically is just a reference to where the player is in the world map. I don't want to get too much into the details. I said I was going to do a high level overview, but as soon as you show the code, it gets excessive. But um, anyway, objects are set, like chests are put randomly throughout anywhere. And sub areas, we have a town and we have the enchanted forest. And I've written these functions in so or in such that where you pick the larger area, so the forest, right? When that's stored in an array called forest list, and then the number right here is the size. Well, you can see down below. Here's a set sub area. Town size of 3, and it's going to create a town of a size of 3. And that works by just finding a random spot in the map that's open, saying this is a town, and then it checks adjacent possible cells, adds one of those, and then it'll check all those adjacent possible cells plus the original ones, and then add more, and it'll keep doing that until it reaches the town size that's needed. Same with Enchanted Forest. So I could just, if I want the towns to be bigger, I can just swap that in. If I want one cell, I could do that, and so on and so forth. And it kind of works. It works pretty well. I will say that I did not, in the slightest, reference how anyone else did these. I only needed help with sort of creating that initial 2D array of valid rooms versus non-valid rooms. Everything else I could do, but just that first step of building that map is tough because I looked up a lot of things on like random maze generators and formulas for that and everything, and but that started creating mazes. It didn't create just worlds that you can move around in. So that's what I'm using for now. Is this that thing that I keep talking about? I'm sorry, I'm moving on. Let's go back to this really quick. Feel guilty. There we go. Okay, that's the list. I will say though, I do have an attempt for tries in here, so this is something I ran into. If you're putting a size 3 town, and let's see if I can show you this really quick because this is something I ran into that's always worth considering. Okay, look down at the bottom corner here. Do you see where the town is? This is actually really perfect. These 3 spots for the town. If what I tried to create afterwards is the enchanted forest, as you can see that it's up to the left, if it was going to be created directly below the town, if that's the cell that was chosen, there's a problem there when it needs to be a size 3 or 3 separate cells. So I have an attempt for tries, and after 10 tries, if it can't find any cell that it's randomly picking around it, which there's only one option, it's just going to give up and stop, and you're going to get a size 1 Enchanted Forest. That's how I decided to do that. I could have split it and had it jump over to somewhere else for the other parts, but I feel that this right now handles it the best because you're never going to need a certain size for things, and I've handled that with other functions that I will. Let's see if I can get closer really quick. I just restarted this like 15 times, hoping to be right next to a town, and this is as close as I got. It just kept putting me like as far as possible from the town, and I really wish I recorded that because the amount of frustration was hilarious. I think that I could talk about some of the other bits really quick, just the basis of how each room is constructed. Um, there's only a few things going on here, and I think I'm going to stall for a second till I get closer to the town. Okay, let's look back at this. This is each room. It looks like this. As you can tell by the fact that it's called test area and the actual file is battle zone, this was originally just going to be a spot where I did combat testing, and it kind of evolved into the everything. This is only 290-ish plus give or take lines of code. Each area that is created, again, it grabs from the world, the area type or whatever, the room type, which is really important, and it actually grabs the object seed. Um, well, sort of. And by that I mean it actually just grabs the list of objects per each room. So each room has some data that has things, and this kind of pulls from that because again, this is where rooms are sort of loaded into rather than being the room itself. This is where exits are applied, and there's a little bit of actual randomness in each room that's not static based on a seed. And one of the things that I kind of ran into fairly early on, which is really easy to adjust to, is what needs to be random and what needs to be modified from being fully random. Anyway, this is where I don't want to go too far into that, but let's take a look at this. I think the last thing I'm going to cover really quick is going over how each room is generated. This is a town, by the way. Um, and the NPCs, I just threw them in, which is really kind of funny because I added them to the enemy tables. Hey, there's the blue house. Okay, that's perfect. All right. The first thing you want to notice is each room has a few key things. It has these trees that make up the walls. It has pathways or dark grass. It's got bushes, trees, barrels in this case, and some grass and then some things. Um, of what is completely random and what is not is really kind of fun. So these bushes, where they appear, and the barrels is completely random. Every time you walk in, they're in different spots. Same with these small little grass items. They're just background things, but they're randomly all over the place, and that doesn't really matter too much. The trees that I'm walking by, the houses, which are, static objects, and the I almost said dark grass, but it's a pathway here. That's determined through the room seed and using some math with open simplex noise to try to create some controlled randomness there. So every time you enter this room, the houses, this the and the I call it terrain mods, so I'm just going to call it that. The terrain modification and the trees will always be in the same spot. And then the bushes and breakables will be randomly placed. So that's kind of where I'm drawing that line between like controlled randomness, right? What I'm going to let be free, whatever you want, and what needs to stay the same, because you'll exit and enter these rooms a lot, and having everything change would be weird. Um, and for these walls, the way I have this done right now is I tried a few things. And the first part was to using open simplex noise to kind of just fill in randomly all over and try to like carve out entry points and exit points so that you could get from one room to the next. That didn't go well at all, and I had to drop away from that. That just didn't work. So the walls themselves are actually static layouts, and there's only a few right now, so it's pretty likely I'll run into the exact same room. It is. It's the same room layout. These are determined by the room seed, and what I'm doing there is nothing too fancy. Right here, this is called wall load. And what this does is I already have two tile maps here, one for the terrain modifications and one that's ground level, which is just the grass. Um, right here is wall load. This adds a new, this will, it doesn't right this second, but it adds a new tile map for the walls. And all this does is it goes and finds the file directory or whatever for where the forest walls are, and then adds in a little bit of math of the room seed and modulo of 3 and adds that to the name. Um, Actually, if I just look down here, if I do forest walls, you can tell that I have a few here. And the reason I have a 3 here is because I'm only using the first 3 of the 4. But every time I just add a new layout, I can just do this and then add that and then just change that number up a little more so it can pull from different things. But there's only 3 right now. This one's not done. But they're easy to add into, and when I do, I could just change that one spot in the code. I probably should make that a constant variable up at the top, but it's only used in that one spot, so it's not that big of a deal for right now. So what I had before was trying to fill in everything or have the fill in everything, then just draw in exits afterwards, and that didn't work. So what I ended up doing was drawing in the room with exits and then blocking the exits off as the room's loaded. So there's a part in the generation where it goes through and says if there's no exit in these areas, it'll put a wall there so you can't leave that way and exit into a cell that doesn't have a room, because the game crashes, and that's not what I want. So that's how I do that. Um, that turned out to be the best way, and again, controlled randomness, right? So These rooms are very, very structured, very, very controlled, but as to which room you're going to get in each cell is a little random. Um, I feel like I could talk all day about this, so I won't. The important thing to note is that, first of all, these guys don't work. I'm using Dialogic, and I don't have any of these people set to anything. I just added, like I said, NPCs to the enemy table and allowed the enemy table to be used in towns. So that way they're generated in the same manner that enemies are. But I don't really know what I'm going to do with there. This blue house is very important. This blue house is something that's chosen to be added to one of the object lists for one of the town rooms on world creation. And basically, it's only going to be here of these three town rooms. That's it. One of these rooms is going to get this blue house, and this could represent a shop. This could represent a, an inn, a church, some sort of unique structure that's necessary in the town. Um, and the way I have this set up right now is if I said there were two blue houses, they could both be right here where I am, or one could be here and in a different cell, or they both could be in different cells, whatever. They're just randomly thrown in. And the way I have that set up in the code is this. Whoops, it jumped down. Um, I have a keyboard shortcut for pause and unpause on. I'm using OBS, and it also jumps down a bit in the editor. Um, I call this sub area things, and that's called the forest open house. I don't know why, or the forest house open. I didn't really know what to do with it. Originally, it was gonna be houses that you could probably walk into. I don't know. I'm at this point now where I kind of want to decide how I want to do things because I could have houses that you could walk into now because that's easy because I could just create the inside of the house could be its own like randomly generated room sort of based off of whatever. Or I could just make it so you interact with like shops and people like outside and you don't go into people's houses all the time. It's something I'm toying with. I mean, do you really need to walk inside a store to buy stuff? Why can't the store just be all outside and exposed? Anyway, this is all I do right this or with this is again, it's kind of similar to how I wrote the sub areas where I pick where the sub area is going to go, how big I want it, and the name of the sub area. And this is I pick the sub area, the name of the cells I'm targeting in the sub area, how many of the thing that I want, and the thing that I'm putting in. So if I could just change this to like 57, it's going to jam 57 of those blue houses into the available town cells. So pretty easy. I'm pretty proud of that. Wrote all that from scratch. Like I said, I just needed help from the beginning, and then let me just make a note here. This is there we go. To-do list. I don't think I can check that today. But anyway, that's kind of the gist, the high level overview of it. I spent a long time writing those functions. There's some weird stuff going on, like uh, various functions I need to rewrite because I added different things and stuff's happening. But that's how I do the role generation now, and I think that the next steps, maybe, sound and music would be nice. I have some placeholders that are terrible. More stuff in general, working on towns. I kind of want to put the NPCs and the houses in there, or the houses you can interact with soon, because right now it's just those houses that you can't do anything and just like walk by. And that's no fun. And then the Enchanted Forest area I need to work on. Most of the enemies that I've shown in passing are actually enemies that should be in the Enchanted Forest, but I wanted to test them out. And not all of them have AI. Like oh geez, that was a surprise worm. Um, not not all of the AI is built in. I think those worms will just kind of walk straight at you, though. I think that's pretty good. The butterflies, I kind of want to have them like have tornado magic or something. That'd be fun. I think you've seen the fairies I'm working on a little bit too. Oh yeah, the floating damage numbers. I was going to talk about that at some point, but that's just something I've always liked in games, and I thought, why not add it? I love floating damage numbers. So the worms being really aggressive, that's fine. The fairies, when you walk near them, they don't actually care about you. They move around randomly, but if you get close enough, they will release really awkward looking um, magic in a cross or plus sort of pattern as they move around. So that's kind of the whole thing because they're fairies. They're not really meant to like be hyper aggressive. So having them be kind of like defensive and also like aloof to the player, I feel like feels kind of like a magical creature. Like it doesn't really acknowledge you're there, but if you get close, it'll bite you with magic. And yeah, but I'm just gonna be working on filling out the stuff now. I mean, I can create sub areas all over the place, but I don't have any content for the sub areas yet, so I'm gonna be working on that. And yeah, that's I'm really pleased with how the animation for that worm came out. Maybe the next thing I'll do is actually do a devlog on just the process of creating. Wow, this looks like such a hard game. Um, how I go about creating creatures and things. Maybe that'll be good. Maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be something else. I don't know. Stay tuned. I hope this turns out okay as a devlog. I hope nobody really saw the last one because that was just not not up to the quality that I like, and I basically just one shot do these devlogs without much thinking. Hey, it's a chest. Um, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how things go. I also still have the armor. Boop. I still have to work on the descriptions and things. There's a bunch of stuff I'm just kind of like casually saying I'll get back to when I want to put more focus. Like I don't want to work too much on the inventory unless I have more things to put in the inventory. Um, but one of the themes, I'm going to end with this, one of the themes that I'm following with this game development cycle is when subtracting and when all the issues I had from before, and as I'm redoing everything, I'm really focusing on the things that I like in games. And I think that's very important for me. It helps keep me motivated. It keeps me feeling like I'm doing something I like. And some of the things that I like in games, uh, that you've already seen is floating damage numbers. That's really cool. Um, Visible changes to equipment, naked. Um, that's something I really like. Random generation and random chance. Huge fans of that. Don't ask why. But I also know that it bothers people too. A lot of people don't like everything to be super random, and that's fine. I get that. There's a certain amount. We all have different thresholds of random chance. There's definitely those moments in every game where RNG drives you crazy. Like I don't know, trying to get certain drops from things in Monster Hunter, or just MMORPGs where you have to do something 12 million times just to get one thing that your friends all got immediately. Um, there's definitely stuff that I do enjoy in that, and so that's going to be there. And some other things that oh no, the coin disappeared. It faded away with time. Um, but yeah, I'm focusing on adding things that I like, and that's what's going to drive a lot of the creativity here. And I think that's where I'm going to end this one with sort of a top level overview, not going too into the details of a lot of how stuff's created. I didn't talk about the monster tables too much. I just kind of alluded to them, but that's something else I'll probably go into more when I have more monsters to actually do stuff with. But yeah, no, stay tuned. There'll be more. Probably more sooner than later this time because I really want to focus on some of the more minor things now. Now that I've covered all like the big global changes that have come. Um, so yeah, uh, I hope you all have a great week? Question mark. Sure, I know how to end videos. Don't judge me.